Last Sunday in church, I came across an interesting substantival prepositional phrase, and it was kind of interesting how the different translations handled it. The phrase, hoi ek peritomes, those of circumcision, occurs twice in the New Testament. The first one is Acts 10:45, and you can see hoi ek peritomes, and then in this case, it has the noun pistoi. So it's interesting how different translations handle it. The NASB says Jewish believers, which is interesting because this is kind of typical of the revision of the NASB, that they're being a little more interpretive. Now, they do have a footnote that says lit, which I don't like, but you know that. Believers of the circumcision, so that makes good sense. CSB, circumcised believers, believers from among the circumcised. NRSV, circumcised believers. NIV, circumcised believers. Net Bible, circumcised believers, with a footnote that says, or the Jewish Christians, which feels anachronistic. It says Greek, the believers from the circumcision. Okay, this is when Peter has gone up to see Cornelius, and Peter preaches, and the Spirit is poured out on the Gentiles. Okay, that's all pretty straightforward. But then the phrase again occurs in Acts 11:2 when Peter's back in Jerusalem having to report. And in this case, it's a little different. Those of the circumcision. What's missing? There's no pistoi. There's no word saying faithful. And it's interesting to me because what I want to know is that omission deliberate, or is the pistoi assumed from the previous passage? If you go to the NASB, it says the Jewish believers. They put believers in italics. And again, literally those from the circumcision. CSB, the circumcision party. In other words, they're saying, well, there is no word for believers there. So this is circumcision party. ESV, circumcision party. Or footnote, those are the circumcision. NRSV, circumcised believers. Well, it doesn't say they're believers. And that's the whole point. Now the footnote, it says Greek lacks believers. Well, if the Greek lacks it, and it's an interpretive position, I think there's no reason to have that in there. The NIV says circumcised believers with no footnote showing that the word believers doesn't occur. Net Bible, circumcised believers, I give it the footnote, the Jewish Christians, Greek, those of the circumcision. So what's going on here? Well, what's going on here is the Greek doesn't say they're believers. And I want to know why. Certainly the Jewish people that went with Peter in Acts 10 were believers, but now they're back in Jerusalem. This is a larger group of people, and Luke isn't willing to say that they're believers. At least that's how I interpret it. So when the NRSV says circumcised believers, I don't care what the footnote says, or the NIV says circumcised believers, or the Net Bible says circumcised believers, NLT, Jewish believers. This is a step of interpretation that I don't think is warranted. Again, do people really read footnotes? Can you really protect yourself by saying in a footnote an alternate translation or the word for the Greek? I don't really know. But again, it's an unusual phrase that only occurs twice in the entire New Testament. And so you might legitimately assume the pistoi from chapter 10. And yet, I do find it interesting that the Greek lacks the word believers, and it's an interpretive position to say that all of the Jews in Acts 11 were in fact true believers. I mean, they certainly identified with Christ. That's certainly to be assumed, and they certainly were Jewish. But these may have been people whose commitment to Jewish tradition is so strong that they hadn't quite yet fully embraced what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And when translations put the word believers in, I'm not comfortable with that.